What's up? Welcome to Founders Club. I'm Alex Lagos, and today we got another good one. Personal transformation facilitator Joy Shaw joins the show to share her incredible path from surviving a near-fatal brain aneurysm to helping others navigate their own deep healing. Joy breaks down the archetypal stages of the hero's journey and explains why self-love is essential for moving past chronic people-pleasing. She candidly discusses the critical importance of setting firm boundaries with clients to prevent burnout and protect your energy as an entrepreneur. Finally, Joy opens up about her approach to utilizing psychedelics and plant medicine, exploring how these tools can be used for both trauma recovery and profound human optimization. Let's get into it.
Joy Shaw, friend, wise, human in my life and in all of our lives if we're lucky enough to have her. Welcome to the show.
You're going to totally make me cry, I can already tell. Well, I had one of those moments on the way this morning. I have 3 adult daughters, and they're really into this show called K-pop Demon Hunters.
Oh.
Which is, it's actually, I think, become the most watched show on Netflix, which is really interesting.
Wow.
And so they're passionate about it. I decided to watch it one night a couple months ago, and I was like moved, like
Really?
teary. It's just beautiful because it's ultimately about shadow work and personal transformation. And it's just, the music is super cathartic and it's like fun, it's upbeat. So I played one of the songs on them this morning and I was like, got choked up and I was like, no, not on the way to go,
No, we want that. We want you to get into your feels
but
today.
Yeah, so then I was like, and I looked at Megan and I was like, I bet I could make her cry. And then
Oh,
we could
God.
both cry. And then
This
we
is
could
gonna be a
just
sob
both
session.
like,
All right, perfect.
it's okay.
This is my first meeting.
I know. I take tissues with me generally most places because most of my clients are crying when they're talking to me at some point.
Yeah.
They'll be like, I don't know what's happening.
I think
And I'm
part of
like,
the problem
yeah.
we have so much pain in the world is we don't cry enough.
We don't.
Which I know is something you help people do, which we will get into.
You gotta feel your feelings.
Before we do, Joy, I know you have lived many lives, both past and in this current one.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you do now and your journey into that.
So I call myself a personal transformation facilitator, like a coach and personal transformation facilitator. I really kind of made myself a student of the transformative process because what you realize is like archetypally even there are, even if you look at like the hero's journey, and the hero's journey is pertinent to the work that I do, which I'll mention in a minute. But there are specific stages to the hero's journey. There are specific stages to the transformative process. And as somebody who's been experiencing personal transformation and then supporting people through that process, you start to notice patterns. And so as you start to notice these patterns, I was like, okay, well, let me start to study this process. And then as anybody who wants to be efficient and effective, how can I accelerate that process? How can I amplify that process? Like, why should that process take so much time? Why should we chip away at it forever? And so I discovered psychedelics as a part of my own personal healing journey probably about a decade ago, and then started working with them personally. And it became just really apparent as I was working with them personally, because I was already working in healing spaces, that it was sort of this missing piece for me to tie it all together to be able to really help people, like ultimately to help change their brains, to help, interrupt patterns and redirect them to evolve, So that's really the focus of my work these days.
Amazing. Okay, a couple of questions there. First of all, for people who don't know, what is the hero's journey?
So the hero's journey, I mean, we actually see it played out on the screen all the time. And what's amazing is once you start to recognize the heroic journey sort of archetypal theme and arc, you will notice it in every film that you watch. Like Star Wars is a really beautiful representation, right? Because it has really clear sort of, he goes like, even when he goes into like the dark night of the soul and he has to figure out who he is and how to work with the force and, dealing with the shadow, like the fear is the path to the dark side, which is also a very sort of Buddhist tenet. And then once he discovers this sort of power that he has and this heart that he has and this passion, that he goes out onto the field of battle and gets tested. So the hero's journey is really sort of this initial call, recognizing that there is something inside of you that wants to be expressed. And then also, usually there's a lot of wounding that is sort of blocking that process, patterns, belief systems, all those different types of things. And then you have to sort of be like, okay, well, who am I really if I am not these patterns and these stories and these narratives? And how do I deconstruct those? And how do I heal those? And how do I repair the parts of me that have been wounded by those aspects of my story so that I can express this gift, and then use it in some way to support the greater good.
Right. So this sort of wounded healer archetype very much has
which
gone
is
on
very
a hero's
Jungian,
journey.
right?
Yes.
Right. And Jung talks about that. I mean, we've talked about that a lot in psychological components, but it's I do, and I'm actually working on a book right now, and it is sort of the theme of it is how to become the hero of your own story.
Beautiful.
Because it's not a victim story. It's a heroic story, and really you figure out that no matter what happens to you, it's all about the stories that you tell about it.
Okay, so you went on your own hero's journey.
I
did.
So
what were you doing before you found medicine?
So I have had many lives. My parents were missionaries when I was a kid. So I grew up living overseas in the Philippines, Germany, and Russia. So I was really like a child of the globe. I was very sort of, but also had this sort of orphan energy, like I didn't really know where I was from, didn't really know where I belonged. Ended up getting married really young and thought, well, I should just follow in my parents' footsteps. And I did. And then I was about 23 years old living in Russia, working as a missionary with my poor ex-husband, and had this sort of awakening, realized that I didn't think that this was the path for me, and I wasn't even sure that I believed any of this anymore. And so I kind of blew my life up and left that world. And I'd always been a musician and an artist and a singer, and I really would identify as a creative over most things. But at the time, that wasn't really valid because it wasn't spiritual enough, and I wanted to make Jesus happy. And so when I started thinking like, oh, well, if I don't really believe this, then I could just express what it is that I'm passionate about, which is creativity and singing and performing. So I ended up in Nashville for that reason. And then that was sort of the beginning of my seeker's journey. And that was back in fall of 2003. So I have been here for a long time. It's like the longest I've ever been anywhere. But as most things, it's like eventually I felt that call, like in my soul, to support people. And I have 3 daughters. So I ended up getting married a second time. And after having my 3rd daughter, I became really passionate about birth. I had this like beautiful home birth, and birth to me felt very initiatory. And I like leaned into the transformative aspect of birth, and I was like, wow, I feel so powerful and so empowered, and I'm going to help other women have transformative, powerful birth experiences. And so I went in and became a doula, thinking that like eventually I'd become a midwife, because there was this sort of way that I wanted to support this birth experience, which is, very transformative in nature. And so I worked in birth for about 15 years. And during that time, I went through a lot of really challenging sort of healing things in my own life, because I have a significant amount of childhood trauma that I had to sort of alchemize and heal. I ended up having a stroke from a brain aneurysm while in the middle of my second divorce, while actually having sex, which is the funniest part of the story. And it makes for a very interesting story. But I did have a near-death experience, and I ended up, for a week in critical care, hanging kind of between life and death. And then I had this pretty intense healing journey that I had to go on myself, and my own sort of, and when you have a traumatized brain, which is a unique sort of situation, and when you've been altered because your brain has been damaged, it's very hard for them to really recognize externally. Like if you don't have obvious deficits, right? So like I could still speak and read and write and walk, and my body was generally moving normally, except for I had like some weird stuff with the left side of my body for a little while because I had a right brain stroke, which was where all my creativity was. So that got negatively impacted, and I felt sort of a loss of connection from that and my emotional regulation, which I was not aware of. Meanwhile, I was a single mom of 3 kids, and so I pivoted at that point and actually was like, I don't know if my brain is going to work very well. I don't know if I have long-term memory. I have to work. I lived with my family for a year while I healed, and I went to massage school. So, because I thought, well, you know what? I want to support people in healing and wellness. I'm already working in birth. This would lend itself well. Plus, I still don't really know what I'm capable of. So trade school seems,
Right.
like I've always been very intelligent. I don't love an academic sort of environment because I'm more of an autodidact and sort of creative in my way of experiencing research and learning. But so I went and I excelled at it and I was really good at it and I loved doing it and I loved supporting people and it just came naturally. And I think now in hindsight, like there was something to the left-right movement because they say, when babies crawl, it helps the left and right brain repair. But being able to use both sides of my body and moving that way was probably really helpful for my brain to repair itself. Now I climb, which is interesting.
Wow.
Climbing is left and right, a lot. So yeah, I did end up doing that. Worked as a massage therapist, a Reiki energy practitioner, and then just started like incorporating more and more modalities. Meanwhile, I'm going on my own healing journey because I don't want to be on blood pressure medicine and I don't want to have another stroke. I ended up with 2 different brain surgeries over the course of 6 months. And so I just was like, again, that voice inside of me, that soul kind of voice was like, I know I can heal. Like, I just don't want to be medicated. I'm pretty sure I can figure out how to heal. I know my body can heal. And so I just kind of was like motivated by that while also having all these people come to me all the time who were clearly in pain. And part of what you figure out as you're going through your own sort of discovery of your authentic self is that there are parts of you that you can't deny it. I am so moved by human suffering. It's just like a part of my nature. It's a part of who I am. And I think, whether it's nature nurture, because I was raised in an environment where we were helping, people in poverty and rescuing them and taught that that was a value I should have. Either way, when I work with clients, I'm always like, how can we alchemize the ingredients of your story to create something with it? The Japanese art of kintsugi, which is if like a piece of pottery breaks, when they mend it, they use that gold thread. And then it just becomes like another piece of art, but it has all of these interesting pieces, these cracks. Or Leonard Cohen, he sings that song, he says, the cracks, that's where the light gets in. So it was finding like those pieces of myself. I sang in like an 80s cover band for 14 years. There's probably people that will watch this that will recognize me from that because it was pretty popular locally. And I did voiceover work. I was like the voice for like a movie phone company. So I was still doing all my creative stuff while trying to figure out how to help people heal, while trying to raise 3 kids, while also trying to, support my own healing journey. And that just continually evolved. And I really think...
How did you find, like as a beginner to this healing process, like where did you start and how did you find the help to find that healing? I think there's a lot of people involved, but if you don't know where to start, where would you start? Well,
and that's so much of the reason why I do what I do, because I didn't know. Yeah. And the places that I went to look for help, like Western medicine, didn't have solutions for me. They were like, well, you're just a miracle, right? Like, you're just lucky not to be medicated anymore. What are you complaining about? And that was it. But they were like, and also you're probably just going to have to take blood pressure medicine the rest of your life because we can't figure that out. And so I started reading. I read like hundreds of books. I started trying just to find other teachers, other guides. I did a lot of trial and error, a lot of like, I like to tell people I learned a lot of my lessons the hard way so they don't have to. Yeah. And I think that's what eventually caused me to shift into coaching, was realizing like, oh, if I can just help give people the resources. And that's one of my favorite things to do in the work that I do, is to channel people towards different teachers that I feel will resonate with them, or different processes that I think will work for them. Because we're so unique and we're all so individual, but once I figure out where they are, I'm like, here's what you need. Also, like, there's a cliff, don't fall off of it, and you get to kind of be a guide for that process. Or I can say, I spent years detouring over there and maybe you don't want to do that. And we can shortcut that process. I think, it's interesting. There's there's almost too much information out there too.
Yes, totally.
Which is another difficulty. So like, how do we navigate that? It's really difficult.
It is really hard. And a lot of people are also out there speaking with a lot of conviction around what it is that they believe is the right thing to do. And maybe it's because it worked beautifully for them. It's funny. I realized this when I was working in birth, because there are a lot of different birth, like there are hypnobirthing, Bradley method. There's all these different methods for like the perfect birth experience. And I'd work with one woman and she'd say, oh, that was amazing for me. And then another one would have taken all the classes, tried the process, and she's like, this is stupid. This doesn't work. Like, I just want to rock and scream and moan. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're not going to be sitting in a meditative state. Like, that's not who you're ever going to be personality wise. I actually created like a personality assessment for my clients so that we could figure out what type of birthing person they were, so that I could help them specifically prepare their body and their psyche for that process. Which is interesting, right? Because again, even in birth and in parenting and in becoming pregnant, like there are, for anything that you're going through, there's a million resources. I got into gut healing for a while, and I was consuming every expert on like healing the microbiome. And I would just take notes on everything, and I was like, okay, well, they all agree on this, but they completely disagree on this, but they all think this, and then this one person, you know, and so, and how am I supposed to know which one I'm supposed to be able to do for myself?
Well, I think your point too, Joy, about, you know, people saying things with a lot of conviction. We do live in a world where people want a quick fix, right? And so, you know, being sold the idea of like, you're going to be happy, you're going to be thin, you're going to find the love of your life, you're going to get pregnant easily or whatever it is. People are drawn to that. Like that is, you know, marketing that does well and oftentimes converts to a paying client, but doesn't necessarily convert to a happy client at the end of the day because they're being sold something that is generally unrealistic, right? Yeah. So what I'm struck by with you is, you know, initially you talked about how this process that you offer clients really does make the hero's journey more efficient, right? Yes. So you did use the word efficient. So you're saying, hey, I can kind of speed this up, right? Yeah. So, and yet, I imagine, because I know you, that you are a very high integrity person and what you're offering is authentic. So how do you kind of negotiate that balance between being like, hey, I'm going to give you an experience that's going to sort of accelerate your healing, while also being honest about the fact that like this work takes many, many years. I know you and I have both been on our spiritual healing journeys and, you know, for 2 decades at this point, right? Yeah. So, I guess I'm just curious how you kind of navigate that, like creating realistic expectations while also offering something that you're saying, I can actually, in however many sessions or in even one medicine work session, help expedite your healing so that you notice a change.
I think that's a really good point. And it's funny because you think about marketing as like an entrepreneur or anybody who works in sales, and really like a lot of my female friends are in spaces where they are marketing what they do or a program or a process, and beautifully. And I can't relate with that the same way. I have to make healing look sexy, basically, right? Like and ultimately the point that I got to was, is it's all about integrity. Like if I am living it and modeling it and showing that it's effective, but also getting to share, and I actually share a lot of my own journey and my own story, or like my path of being a parent. We've had to do a significant amount of generational healing, both up and down, right? With my mother, with my daughters, a lot of healing that I had to do in my own relationships and my romantic processes because of the wounding I had from earlier. And so I share that because if I can share the success or the accomplishments or, you know, and model just like this is effective because I'm practicing it and it's working, then I can, in a way, inspire other people to want to do the same. And a lot of clients have come to me because they will have watched me on Instagram or somehow seen me in a public place and said, well, you know, it just seems like you've got something figured out, and could you maybe share that with me? It is challenging though, because not everybody wants to put all the work in. So it is, and I have plenty of clients who have fallen by the wayside, you know, nice. or I can see where we're going to go and how far they can go. And then they're content with just like this much growth and evolution once they realize how hard it is, or it really has changed their lives significantly. And that's good. Totally. But they're just going to kind of stay there because they came to recognize how much work it was going to take. And that also, it's never done. Yeah, it's never over. But there's a way that eventually you become engaged with the process, and it becomes about the process and less about the objective, because you're just present with that process and kind of appreciating every part of what you're going through and what it's doing to you, and you become engaged with it.
Totally. I appreciate that so much about you, Joy. And I think that's something we share, the idea that like it's never over. Like we're not selling something to clients that's like, and then everything's going to be perfect and you're never going to feel a difficult emotion again. I think both of our work is very informed by Buddhism, which is all about like being human is a lot of suffering. But, through developing certain tools, you can be resilient to that suffering and find the beauty and appreciate the moments of joy and learn from the moments of pain and, just be grateful to be here kind of thing. But it doesn't mean that we don't have our moments that are very challenging. And
I do think having a spiritual connection of some sort does become really essential. And I ran very far from that when I left that world. I was so disillusioned. And actually quite a few of my clients are deconstructing religious wounding of some sort, which is really sad because of that religious wounding, it makes it very hard for them to connect to something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
And I work with a lot of people with addictive patterning. A lot of entrepreneurs have. A lot of my entrepreneurs, like CEO clients, are struggling with aspects of addiction in their life, because it's just a way that they're coping with whatever's going on. I mean, most people that I work with who are in some way professionally successful tried to become professionally successful in order to prove to their mom or dad that they were finally worth something, right? Or to just, get that final recognition, or maybe they grew up in really terrible poverty and they wanted something better for themselves, and they thought, well, this is going to make me happy and this is everything. And culture sells you that is everything. And then they get there to like the pinnacle of their professional experience, and they're just like, what the hell?
This is it. Yeah.
This is not, why am I so miserable? I have all the things that anybody said that I should want to have, and I can't even enjoy it. But I also love working with those clients because I'm like, look, you have all of this. Like, you're not in a really desperate, challenging place like I was. Like, I was in poverty. I was actually, during my stroke, like when I was recovering, all of my financial stuff went into collections, and I had to dig myself out of a very deep hole. I needed like government health care for a long time, and I still had to figure out how to grow. So like, if you have all those resources, at least we have that, right? Let's get you to the point where you can actually enjoy it and be present with it.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point around, like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
There's this sort of self-actualization at the top, and it's like basic kind of safety needs at the bottom. And the reality is, spirituality for many is a privilege, right? Yep. Like, that is not something that a lot of people have the time or the capacity or the resources to be able to experience, right? It's just survival. And in some ways, people who are just trying to survive, they don't have that kind of like existential crisis that a lot of us have when we're in a place where
there's
we're
not even time.
I have everything,
right.
So now what, right? And I think that's, probably what a lot of your clients and my clients are experiencing when they're like, but wait, I have the money, I have the fancy things, I have the family or the partner or the love or whatever it is, and there still feels like there's something missing. And oftentimes that is disconnection from a spiritual source, and or a trauma wound, right? That has that's unhealed. And it sounds like you do both of that work.
I do. And I never have an agenda when it comes to like a spiritual connection, because I think it has to be so highly authentic and unique to each person. And interestingly enough, like my mother is a linguist, and I learned a lot about language, and I feel like I am able to translate a lot of different components of what I teach and support people with into a language they can understand.
Yeah.
And that is really sort of the key, because we all are so different in the way that we understand things. And then I've also found that like the clients that really connect with me the most, that we resonate the most with, that feel like the most authentic sort of pairing, are the ones where the way I communicate just inherently and innately just lands for them.
Totally.
It's like a puzzle piece that fits. And then they're like, wow, the way you said that, like I've heard it so many times, but the way you just said it makes so much sense. And now I can work with that.
Yeah, it's funny. My husband and I we were at couples therapy yesterday, and we've seen like a number of couples therapists, and a lot of them we have like not connected with. And our therapist last night, he was like, Megan, like, you're pretty intense. And I was like, you know what? You know where people have never told me that before? New York City.
I know.
I'm like, have you ever thought that maybe it's a cultural thing around here that like, sure, like I'm too intense for the South, but I'm certainly belong. And
which my family's originally from like New Jersey and New York, right? So that's there. It's like you're fighting for air in my household. Like, hey, I want to say something.
Totally. And so, and I was saying to my husband, I was saying to Adam, I was like, this is why some clients love working with me and some can't stand it, right? Because some they're like, oh my gosh, whoa, she's talking too fast. It's too much. And I'm like, some of my clients are like, yes, keep it coming. Let's go. Like, this is the pace, right?
Yeah.
And of course, there are times to slow it down and like bring someone into their body and all of that. But I think what you're saying about just being like, listen, like the right clients who are for you will find you.
They will.
And the ones who are looking for someone who's like maybe a little has a different energy or a different vibe or whatever is going to find them. So,
well, and that's really, I think, if I were going to give a takeaway today to anybody, because look at that list that you sent me. Yeah. And I was like, well, that's something that I say all the time. Like, what we do should ultimately be, like, we will find the most ease with it, an expression of who we are. Right. And so if we are just taking the time to get to know who we are and really learning how to be who it is that we are, then we express that through what we do, and it will feel so authentic. Then you're not only that, but like if you're trying to be what everybody thinks that you're supposed to be, and you're out here on this like periphery being like, oh, well, I'll adjust myself for this audience, and I'll do this for this group of people, and I'll make my staff happy doing this. And you're my wife and my kids, and like you're exhausted. And also, it never works because people are just fickle and they project things onto you, And so the more that you can get comfortable with who it is that you are and really, like, as trite as it sounds, love yourself.
Yeah.
Like, if you can learn to love yourself, which I will say has been the single most hard, difficult thing I've ever done.
Yeah. And probably the most transformative.
And the most transformative. And it's heartbreaking that it's that hard for us to love ourselves. Because especially as like a parent who has 3 children that are just like, to me, everything in the world. And from the time that they were born, I just was like, you are just pure love. And all I feel towards you is love. And yet I raised them, sadly, because I didn't know how to love myself, didn't model it.
Yeah.
So they're still, at 20, 25, and 24 working on their self-love journey.
Yeah. Well, and they're also young women in this world. It's not all you. We live in a culture that tells us to hate ourselves and profits off of it.
Yeah, it does. It does. But I have met rare people, and I can think of a few, like right now that I've met off the top of my head, that grew up always feeling okay about who they were because of the way they were raised. Even though they grew up in environments where they didn't feel like they fit in, they never felt like there was something wrong with them for being the way that they were.
Yeah.
I
think I have so many questions about, your referral network and, marketing yourself and all of that. But I think you're touching on something so important that we probably won't speak about with many guests.
Yeah.
And so I think this idea of self-love, let's talk about that some more.
Yeah.
So, of course, I have my perspectives on this, and so do you. And so I'm sure they're aligned in some ways. But where does that sort of self-rejection come from, or that absence of self-love? You alluded to it when you talked about maybe not being loved enough in childhood. I mentioned society. Like, let's talk about how a person might be in a place where they have a critical inner voice, or they have that kind of chronic shame that walks around with them and tells them they're not good enough and they don't belong.
Yeah, which is most of us, really. Like it was an epiphany moment for me when I realized I had an abusive relationship with myself. And I was getting into relationships where I was treated very poorly by the men I was in relationships with, for the most part, most of them. You would probably call them abusive relationships, but I'm not going to get into those stories. But I became very aware at one point in time, which was a key pivotal moment. Like I had a huge shift after this, where I was like, why am I allowing myself to be spoken to this way? And I realized that it was just a reflection of the way that I already speak to myself, right? Because why would I ever allow anybody to speak to me that way if I wasn't already beating myself up and treating myself like I was stupid or dumb or inadequate or not good enough all the time? And when I started really, and a lot of what I work with people through is like learning how to cultivate enough awareness to start becoming aware of the voice and the stories and the narrative and the fact that you are actually talking to yourself all the time. Your brain is just chattering away to you constantly, and what the nature of that voice was. And so I was like, oh, wow, like I got to take care of myself. I need to and I get into unsafe situations because, well, this is not a safe situation. Right. And so much of the work that I do requires that I be a safe space. People can only heal in a safe space. We have so few safe spaces in the world. And the only way I could be a safe space is if I am a safe space for myself. Right. Because if everything I do is an expression of who I am, which is, again, that integrity piece that I'm working with all the time. So I am just working through that. I tell clients, you know how much you love yourself by how you schedule your time. Because if you are not giving yourself, this is the earliest I'm ever out of the house to do anything. Like I don't schedule things before 10 a.m. because I know that where I am with my sleep cycles get thrown off just ever since my brain trauma, but especially now that I'm in perimenopause and my hormones are changing. So if I don't have a great night's sleep, I need that morning to start a little slower, recalibrate, or what do I need to do to support myself, to get myself set up to meet the day on my own terms. And then, and then I can kind of choose, like, I like to give myself a lot of time to work with each of my clients and not cut it to a schedule, but then I also don't want to have to rush from thing to thing. So I make sure I give myself enough time between those things. Like, I have time to breathe. I have time to be a person between the work that I do to show up with my clients. I don't make as much money, and I'm not, like grinding away and crunching numbers and stuff, but I am getting to experience life in a way that feels supportive of who it is that I am, which is really the most loving thing I can do. And then I don't burn out. You know?
I think you're saying something that not a lot of people will say on this podcast, right? Which is, I choose my freedom and time over maybe scaling, right? And I think it's a really important conversation because, so much in the entrepreneurship conversation, and I'm sure, Spencer, you can relate to this, is like, scale, make as much money as possible, reach as many people as possible. And I always say, like, at what cost, right? And that often is that ego that's like, when you reach that point, you will be happy. And it's like, actually, the moments that matter are these little in-between moments where you can sleep in. I also have a nothing before 10 a.m. rule, except for this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's like those little in-between moments. And you cannot put a price on the peace that one feels when there's not that anxiety of like, what do I have to get to next?
Oh, yeah.
And, oh, shit, did I do that thing well enough that just happened? Being able to just be in a moment, I mean, that is living, right? And so this idea that placing value on our, behaviors and actions, it doesn't have to be about necessarily productivity or earning potential or, opportunity cost. It's like, what price would you, what I'll say to clients often is, how much would you pay to have a day off, right? Like, how much would you pay? And then look at reverse engineer that. Like, okay, well, then does it really matter to take that extra client or to take this gig? Like, you reach a point where it's sure, $1,000, couple $1,000, $10,000, like that matters in the beginning a lot more. But people reach a point where they're like, I don't know if I would, maybe I would pay $10,000 to have another week in my life, with my people I love.
Especially once you start learning how to be present, which is really a big part of that process, right? Like, I'm working with people. I work with people through a 12-part coaching process that I call the alchemy of self-mastery and conscious creation. Like, how can you become a conscious creator? Consciously creating is who it is that you were really kind of designed uniquely to be. And that really requires levels of self-mastery. And in that, a part of that is like learning how to be present. And the more that you're present, the better quality of energy that you give. And I'm always quality over quantity. But also the more that you actually get to enjoy the experience of everything that you're doing. Like, I love what people ask me, like, if you could do anything and you didn't need to get paid for it because you had as much money as you wanted, would you do anything differently? And I'm like, no, this is exactly what I was made to do. And this is what I love to do. This is what fulfills me. Getting to witness people like become the heroes of their own stories is just an amazing way to spend your days. Or even just getting to be with them, because I also do help people die sometimes, and I work with people through deep grief processes, and getting to know that, like, I can't make this easier for you, and I can't take away the pain, but I can be with you in it, and I know how to be very present with you in that, and I know how to, like, allow you to have your process, but make sure that you don't feel alone in it.
Yeah. And go ahead.
How do you manage, like, especially as someone who's like a type A people pleaser?
Yeah.
It's really difficult, like, because I find myself wanting to help everyone around me succeed.
Totally.
So how do you, like, what are some micro practices maybe that we could use to, like, kind of monitor ourselves to make sure that we're not going off the rails? Because I'll set these intentions that I'm going to take off a certain day or whatever, and then stuff goes nuts and I end up doing a bunch of extra projects or whatever.
I get that. Totally. Well, and I'm like a recovering perfectionist people pleaser, right? I was definitely high functioning in that area for a long time. I was like, I can be everything to everybody all the time. And I actually was just journaling about this the other day, and I was like, how did I used to get so much shit? Like, how did I do
when you're like,
that?
I'm much less productive now that I give less fucks.
I know. I was like listing what a day was like and having 3 kids at home because they're all out of the house now, and I was like, wow. And I feel like I still have to catch up on my file. Like, how was I doing all of that? But really the way I do life has changed so much since then. But a mantra that I adopted that was really helpful was, that's not my job. That's not my job. Not my job. How you feel about that? Not my job. You take care of that, not your job. And here's the other thing that it helps to remember, that there's two things happening. The highly codependent, like people pleaser, perceives themselves as being sacrificial and loving and caring. But what's not loving and caring is allowing other people to stay limited and keeping them from growing.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you realize that, like, if I'm so worried about you being uncomfortable that I'm going to take on this stuff and I'll be uncomfortable to make it easier for you, guess who's not going to grow? Right? The person who's not getting the opportunity to deal with challenge and difficulty. But if I can empower you to believe that you are capable of dealing with challenge and difficulty and make you feel good about your ability to do that, then, and this is also a parenting component, like a big part of raising children is that, because it's so much easier if you do it for them, but then they're not going to learn how to do it. And so you have to kind of give them opportunities to fumble and make messes. I used to redecorate the Christmas tree after the kids did it and then went to bed at night, because I was like, you guys go do the thing, and then I can put things back in, because everything is just in this one spot that you can reach, and I'll spread it all. They didn't notice, they were little. But I wanted to give them the opportunity to do it instead of being like, you sit there and watch mommy make the tree look pretty. So there's those types of things where you can be like, okay, I'm going to let you struggle. I'm going to let you fumble, because I know that ultimately it's going to help you grow. Also, we don't end up getting to connect with people as deeply as we wish that we could, and we end up feeling really lonely. I think that's also something that a lot of people pleasers feel.
So you're hiding a part of yourself.
You're hiding a part of yourself, and you're saying, I'll go all the way over here to meet you. But nobody's ever doing that for us. But ultimately, we're not even giving them the opportunity to say that, actually, I'm really tired today. And then we could be surprised by how they might be able to show up for us.
Yeah.
That's a big piece of it.
Totally. And I think there's also a healing opportunity that gets missed by people pleasers, because, I see everything through a lens of coming back to this chronic shame wound. And that wound gets reinforced whenever we think okay, I'm not deserving or worthy enough of expressing my needs and still being loved, still being cared for, still belonging, even though I have needs and might burden someone or be inconvenient. And so it just keeps reinforcing, I will never allow myself what we call the corrective emotional experience of needing, of being inconvenient, of being difficult, and having someone be like, yeah, oh, Spencer, I totally understand that you can't do that this week or whatever. Okay, cool. I'll get someone else to do it, or I'll do it myself. Or now the caveat to that is that when we start setting boundaries and practicing assertiveness with people in our lives, which is very challenging for the people pleasers, some people that we may have created in our circle don't like that. And we might have actually surrounded ourselves with people who are a little exploitative and want to take advantage of that. And so there can be this sort of very challenging initial step where it's you have to kind of hold firm and allow people to be disappointed or frustrated or be like, wait, what? Why can't you get me that within the next few hours? So that's something to be mindful of. And that's where, I think there can be micro practices, but also working with a coach or a therapist is so important through this process, because it's a lot to try to navigate by yourself.
Well, and you will go through a shedding period where the people who are just only in a friendship or relationship with you or professional relationship with you is because of that dynamic. Right? I remember that was a really challenging season for me when I realized how many of the relationships I had were based on that unspoken agreement that I would adapt and I would adjust and I would flex and I would, and then there was a space that was opened up, and I really use that time, and I work with my clients. I'm like, this is an important part of the transformative process, right? I normalize that phase for them, and I give them tools specifically to work with that phase so that they're capable of moving into community and connecting with people that really are authentically similar to them, and also self-aware enough and interested in having reciprocal relationships. And it ends up being a much more fulfilling experience down the road, but there are losses. I'm not going to lie. There are losses along the way, and they're kind of essential.
And it's difficult to receive at first. Receiving can feel very uncomfortable, and there's a vulnerability in it of whoa, what do I, owe this person? Or I feel kind of like they're, talking shame again, like I don't deserve this, or all the things that come up. And another piece that can be helpful for people is understanding like, where does that part maybe come from? How is it trying to protect you? Usually that develops when we're in childhood as maybe being like, having to, I know for me, it was like, having to navigate a lot of turmoil and chaos in my family system and, believing that if I put everyone else's needs first, then maybe I would get my needs met. Right. And so I'm sure people who, have that people pleasing part can relate in some way or have their own version of how that started. But it can be important to recognize like, okay, like this once was adaptive. Like it really did once help me get like, the love or the attention or, the safety that I needed or believed I needed as a child. And now it's not, we can still use it in certain places. Like it's like, we can be very intuitive and know exactly what our clients need and whatnot. But there's also now a boundaries piece. Yeah. Which brings me to my next question, Joy, which is boundaries with clients, right? Like you've spoken about that before in our friendship. Not with me yet, but I welcome you to. I welcome you to. But
as a recovering people pleaser, she's like, "Are you sure this is not too much?" Like, no, you're fine.
But with clients, right? You do very unique, deep, intense work. Yeah. And actually, I know you had mentioned sort of having some challenges with clients with boundaries recently. So tell me how you navigate that, boundaries with clients.
What's interesting is obviously most of the clients that I'm working with are still going to be very much in a space where they're feeling very needy, or there's still people who don't have good boundaries in their own lives, so they're not going to know how to honor and respect somebody else's boundaries. So I am ultimately modeling good boundaries for them, like very much in like a parent, as much as I'm setting those boundaries. And so I have a little bit of grace in the beginning of that process, knowing like if I can look at somebody and I can see, maybe you're a PTSD combat veteran that I'm working with who's dealing with all kinds of nervous system dysregulation and, and trauma or whatever it is. And so then I can say, this is the way that I work. And Sundays are self-care days. No, I won't set up anything to do with you this day. And there's this communication, just like continuous, steady communication about this sort of boundary. And then obviously if over that grace period, it isn't responded to and honored and there is not awareness around it, then I have to I've had more direct conversations with people when it became apparent that they weren't sort of understanding these boundaries are being set, because I was giving them the opportunity to sort of like learn a new way of being. Then I had to put more language around it. And then I've definitely had clients who were not interested in that. And then we don't work together anymore. And so there has to be a situation that also feels healthy to me. And then there are a lot of times where I show up 150% and I'm pouring into their process. Like if we're doing intensive work or we're doing integration sessions around that, and then there's also communication about like, hey, in order for me to show up and give you this, and also I have other people that are going to need this kind of presence from me, I have to recover, right? Like I'm a vessel and I have to restore myself so that I can show up and continue to support you. And I talk about it in a way that's teaching, so that I can teach them how to be the same, because a lot of the clients that I work with are what I call high capacity individuals. We are high capacity individuals. We are like agents of chaos, right? And so we are capable of working within a chaotic environment and really kind of using all those ingredients and moving them through. But sometimes we're a little hooked to that chaotic environment, and our nervous systems are sort of adapted to it so much so that there's so many things, like I'm helping their nervous system recalibrate and I'm teaching them how to work with their own chaos. And then when that becomes overwhelming, and there are definitely times where I compromise my boundaries, and I get to do that when I know that like 10 minutes of talking somebody off the ledge is going to make all the difference. And it could be 11 o'clock at night and my notifications could be silenced, but I might have picked up my phone and been like, I know this person and where they are in the transformative process and what stage they're at and what key thing they need to hear right now. And I am going to pick up the phone and make a phone call.
And the difference is you are making that choice, right?
And I make those choices on occasion.
Obligated. Yeah. And I think that's something that, again, you don't have to be a healer necessarily to like have to for it to be beneficial to at least have some of this insight into your own process. I think a lot of service providers, entrepreneurs who are service providers, just feel like, okay, the moment someone, I've got to immediately respond to them, or I have to go above and beyond this sort of over functioning, which leads to burnout, right? And so, this idea of, well, someone is paying me for a service, but does that service include me being their personal, in their pocket, kind of always available at any time, right? And kind of getting clear on, all right, what is my offering? Like, okay, there's this sort of, there is, yes, whatever the service is that I'm offering, but in today's day and age where, people have we have our iPhones in our pockets, from people oftentimes have our numbers and can text us, or people are used to being able to now go on ChatGPT and get an answer immediately. There is this sort of entitlement from customers and clients of like, I need it now. And if we don't have those clear boundaries, it's definitely a recipe for not only burning out, but also really resenting the work that we do.
Oh, totally. And eventually that does translate subconsciously to the people that you're working with. They will feel it. And especially if you're like me and you work with highly intuitive, empathetic people, then eventually they're going to feel if the energy is off. And then that, for me, is always bringing me back to having integrity with my own process. And I have so many practices, and I teach them. Like I'm mostly arming clients with tools and practices and teaching them how to work with them. The way that I work, it is like you are going to walk yourself towards your own healing, wholeness, and expansion. And I am going to support you in that process, teach you how to work with these tools, share with you what little bit of instruction and guidance you need around that. And that's the thing about coaching that is different than counseling or therapy, that I work with therapists. And I've actually had this conversation with some of my therapist clients where I'm like, what we do that is different, because they will come to me wanting me to treat them like a therapist would treat them. And I'm like, no, I'm your coach. And this is different. Like if I'm standing on the sidelines and you're out there on the soccer field, right? Like we did a bunch of drills in practice and you know how to do this. And we've worked on all of these skill sets in practice. And I'm just going to be like, oh yeah, covered left flank, whatever, But when you run down the hill and you're using all of the things that you figured out how to do and then you score that goal, that's your accomplishment. And I'm just here on the sidelines, like celebrating it with you, cheering you on, but like that's your accomplishment. Or if, say, the heroic journey, when I like to describe it, it's like if there is this sort of wilderness landscape that we're going through and we're trying to get to the other side where there's this vast expanse. I could carve out a trail and have everybody follow me on that trail. But like I personally like a path through the mountains. Like I'm a climber and I think it's cool if you got a view, right? And it's up high in the elevation. But there's going to be people who like a path down by the river or, through the wilderness and the jungle, getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. Like that's their bag. And so if I give you the tools and teach you how to work with them, you carve out a path that feels authentic to you through that landscape. And when you get to the other side, like that view is yours, right? You've accomplished it. You've gotten there. And I think that is what we need is so many of us struggle because we can't get out of feeling like we're a victim. We're a victim of the political landscape. We're a victim of the patriarchy. We're the victim of our hormones. We're the victim of, our spouses. We're the victim of our children who are exhausting us, and motherhood is disillusionment, like whatever it is. We can't actually heal and accomplish anything until we shift out of feeling like we're the victim and we become empowered to believe that we can work with what we have. And that's really like the key pivotal piece of everything that I do. But it was also what I had to figure out in my own life because I had a lot of things to be the victim of. And there are a lot of things about my life that have been very challenging to accept and be okay with. I mean, there are things about my current reality that when I sit with them, I'm like, well, this is certainly not where I thought I'd be at almost 48 years old. But I don't look at my life like that anymore. I look at it through the lens of all of the things that I'm grateful for and all of the things that I've accomplished and all of the beautiful lessons that I've learned and the presence that I can access, And in presence is where we experience things like joy and wonder. But yeah, it is, which is, of course, my name. But it took me most of my life to figure out how to experience that state, honestly.
I think that piece you just said around referencing sort of how either we can enable others or be enabled, right?
Yeah.
And when we're enabled, oftentimes we do find ourselves in that victim stance. And I would like challenge you somewhat on the whole coach versus therapist, just because I am a therapist and we very much have that same perspective. I remember a
But you're like
supervisor.
a coach therapist.
I am, but I mean,
Yes.
I remember a supervisor when I was, or not a supervisor, I guess she was a colleague. I was credentialed and everything by then. But I remember when I was early on in my career, this is over a decade ago, probably 15 years ago, and she said to me, I remember I was talking about a client who was highly suicidal and I was like so stressed about. And she was like, in therapy, it is our role to balance care and respect for a person's autonomy. And if we go too far into the care, if we go too far into the care piece, then we disempower our clients. We disempower our people in our lives if we're trying to rescue them and trying to save them and trying to overfunction and people please and all that. We don't allow them to be in that pain long enough to realize what they're capable of, because pain actually can be very empowering when you find your way through it and realize like, oh, actually, like, pain has given me resilience and humor and empathy and creativity and wisdom and like all of these beautiful things. So, and speaking of psychedelics, I did a Bufo journey, which is 5-MeO-DMT. Yes, I was 5-MeO-DMT like several years ago. And I remember having a similar experience with a shaman. And she was like, I was like, oh, like I wish my dad this, and I wish my mom that, and I wish my ex that. And she just kept being like, respect their journey, respect their journey, respect their journey. And I think your piece around like, either over the mountains or like through the woods, it's also our job to just respect humans' choices and journeys. Like, just because we would do something one way doesn't mean that that's right for them, right? We gotta meet people where they're at. Yeah. And I think that can be translated both as healers, but also just like as people in this world, being like, okay, like that's your journey, and I trust that whatever pain you're in right now or whatever frustration you're with, like that is going to be a teacher for you, and you're gonna get to a place where it all makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. How do you all deal with, like, I mean, you're dealing with people's emotions all the time. Like, how do you guys recharge and like negotiate this? It seems very difficult from an outsider's perspective.
Well, again, it's like I have to be in integrity with my own process and my own practices. And as a high capacity individual, one of the big key pieces is like I have drained my pain reservoir, right? Like a lot of times what reacts in us or what gets triggered in us in any environment is like unprocessed emotion. So say you're reacting to something on a scale of like 1 to 10 and you get angry like around an 8, but the experience of what happened, like maybe you stubbed your toe or somebody dropped something on the floor and you're not like you're blowing up about it, it's because there's unprocessed old stuff there, right? That's just a small example of that. But a lot of the work that I do with clients with psychedelics is like draining what I call that pain reservoir or that pain body, as Jung and Eckhart Tolle talk about, but like that we're not meeting the world with all of this pain that we've sort of got like a lid on. And then the moment that something happens and that activates it, it like opens it up. Because if I'm not draining this reservoir, when I'm in a space with somebody else who's in that pain and I'm feeling that pain with them, then I'm carrying that along with my own load. So I have to kind of have really good energetic and emotional hygiene, basically. Like when I cried on the way here today, listening to that beautiful sort of cathartic song that's, all about like healing your patterns and transforming your shadows. And to me, that's just like, I feel like, so much beautiful emotional gratitude for that process. But if I get emotional, I'm like, there's still like a little bit of reservoir. There's just a little pain in that reservoir, and I let it come out. Yeah. Like I let that come through. I allow it to move through me, because then I know that like I'm a little bit lighter and that won't be there, just kind of waiting for an opportunity to be felt. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of hygiene practices that I have of making sure that like my vessel is clear and solid, and then self-care practices. So when I work with my clients, I'm like, let's create rituals to bookend your day, and these are going to be sort of the refuges in your day, and you're going to set yourself up and like calibrate your system at the beginning of the day and give yourself everything that you need to sort of meet the day feeling full, prepared, ready, and really like on your own terms. Like how I wake up in the morning does not get to determine how I'm going to experience the day. Yeah. But sometimes how I wake up in the morning is going to take a couple of hours to recalibrate, right? Yeah. And work through, and maybe I got to journal and exercise and whatever. And then I'll get into my day. And then depending on how that goes, because I never know what it's going to be like, I catch and caretake myself at the end of the day. And I tell people this, like when you're growing up as a kid and you're raising babies, you create these bedtime routines for your children. You gotta like give them a bath and this and that, all the things. And then we grow up and we stop doing that. But like we always need a bedtime routine. We always need a way to like wind ourselves down and support ourselves for sleep at night. And so, yeah, those are some of the simplest things you can do that will make such a difference.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, very similar to Joy, and just to add on, like boundaries is a huge one, like trying to get out in front of it, really being clear around like how many clients or how few clients, honestly, I want to see a week, and saying no to things and realizing like, that's what's the saying? It's like that's an active resistance or whatever in a world that, I don't know, I'm butchering it, but basically realizing that like that some people will frown upon that, you know, honestly, like my husband doesn't get it. Like he doesn't get why I don't work more, right? Because he knows like I could make a lot more money, like, but I'm like, you know what? Like my time is worth more than what that dollar amount would be. And so remembering like, especially I'm Canadian and Joy, I know you're American, but like you've lived all over the world. Realizing like this is a very American, like capitalistic mentality of like you always have to be working and taking on more and more clients. And just because there's an opportunity, you should take it. So boundaries is a big one, giving myself permission to set those, knowing that I will experience what you call, as we call, compassion fatigue if I see too many clients. And then I do start to resent the work. And Joy's exactly right. Like clients will feel that. And I know it's a sign for me if I ever leave a session where I'm like, or if I'm going into a session where I'm like, I don't want to see this client, or I leave and I'm like, I really like just don't have the energy, that I have gone away from whatever I want to be, which is, this is sacred work that I do. I'm so fucking lucky. We are so lucky to be able to do the work that we do, and that we get to sit with people and like the depths of their pain that they would never share with anyone. They tell us like their deepest, darkest secrets, and they trust us with that. And so that is an honor. And if I ever feel like that's not an honor, that's a sign for me I'm taking on too much. And then simple kind of like micro practices, as you were describing, Joy, like I need sunlight every day. I need to get outside every day in some form. I need to get movement every day in some form. And I use a lot of medicine myself. Like I will do, you know, my own sort of self-guided journey probably once a month with psilocybin. And then, you know, what's funny, like this is one that, I mean, I feel like I now can say, because I'm like married and not going to be the crazy cat lady, but I love my cats so much. And they're my little meditative beings.
How many do you have?
Two.
Oh,
Only two. That's more than that. It's like, exactly. But like, it's so interesting because, you know, I do yoga and I've been like Vipassana retreats. I've done all the meditation, and I'm telling you, my cats are giving them way more meditative experience than any of that, because I can just be so present with them. And those moments of presence where we're really not like in our heads or like thinking about the future, thinking about the past, just thinking about something, where we can just be fully present. And I'm looking forward to hopefully experiencing parenthood and having some of that as well, where you're like, I'm just fully in this, even if I am fucking exhausted and all the rest. So I think those moments, just for people to hear those recapped, sunlight, movement, and some form of like meditation, but it doesn't have to look like sitting on a cushion and like having your hands like this and repeating a mantra, right? Like finding that thing, climbing, that really brings you into the present. Tennis is something that I've been back playing, that I played a lot as a kid. And those are things that like help me really move the energy through my body and kind of ground and meet my own needs versus like always just trying to meet somebody else's.
Yeah.
And
I do think there's a value to balance. We think of balance as like this sort of middle place that we're supposed to walk that's like straight, and it's not. This is balance, right? Balance is like this. And as you develop in your maturity and in your wisdom and your practice and in your embodiment of all of these ways of being, balance starts to look like this. But I think there's even a value to getting out of balance, because anytime that I'm out of balance, I am learning from that experience, and it's informed. Like contrast is a clarifier, and it shows you kind of what needs adjusting and what needs refining and what you do want and what you don't want. And sometimes you have to experience, and I'm an experience type of person, right? Like I want to feel the thing, and sometimes I'm going to feel a really negative thing because of choices I made. But then I get to learn from that experience, and then that informs me, and then I find my way back towards the middle again. And then maybe I'll go too far the other way because I overcorrected, but then I'll come back around, you know? But if you're engaged with the process and it's not about being perfect, then you can find value in that experience as well.
Yeah, if you can kind of always just be curious and just treat it as like, I'm just observing, just noticing. Just notice is probably the number one thing I say to most of my clients.
Well, that's interesting. I'm like, so that's interesting.
So I feel like we could talk to you forever, Joy. Spencer, I want to give you the floor if you have any final questions for Joy.
One last question, actually. I mean, I know you're talking about medicinal and the whole psychedelic journey. Is that for anybody to explore, or is there a process that you should take some sort of healing journey ahead of that, then get into psychedelics?
You know, what I have found as the longer I practice in this space is that I do believe anybody can work with psychedelics. I think the way that people work with psychedelics will vary. I think, especially if you're taking the plant medicine approach, which is these are teachers, these are allies, and we are building a relationship with the plant, right? And that is more of the sort of medicine path, spiritual approach. And I really work with a hybrid of like science and research and spirituality and honoring that process and the culture behind it. But when you are building a relationship with it, sometimes you just got to microdose, right? You microdose, spend a little bit of time together, get to know each other, trust this feeling, trust this experience. I work with a lot of people helping them get off of pharmaceutical medications and pivoting towards, because I also have been working in holistic health for years, so I help them like balance their brain chemistry, which is what I'm doing with myself all the time with my crazy brain. And, let's get your dopamine levels right and get your cortisol levels down, and then incorporate some microdosing, and then figure out how to get you feeling sort of more connected and aligned. Research is also showing that we are making more radical and effective change long-term in the brain with microdosing than we do with like multiple high-dose experiences. And then once we've done that and you're starting to work with your own process and kind of resonate with different ways that you want to heal, a lot of times you'll kind of know when you're ready to go in deeper, because you can kind of see where some of your stuck places are, where some of your patterns are, where some of your wounding is, that you're prepared and ready to do work around. I do find that oftentimes can be a gentler sort of approach to it. And I've also found that in years of working in this space, many people come in wanting a high dose experience, but then they don't have the architecture and the infrastructure to really integrate it. So I put a lot of focus in my integration work. And I really like to be able to support people in that process as much as possible, because otherwise, why do it, right? If it's not effective and you can't translate it into your life in an effective way.
And I would add one thing to that too, that is I experience is pretty beneficial for clients before they decide to at least go into more of a more intense medicine journey, is having some degree of self-compassion. Yeah. So having what we were talking about before is self-love. So having some ability to sit with their emotional discomfort and respond in a loving way, as opposed to judging themselves in that, because especially men in our society, but everybody really, when we feel something uncomfortable like anxiety or sadness or shame or guilt, there's oftentimes this critical inner voice that's like, you're weak, or you're I can't believe you. There's this anxiety about feeling anxiety, there's shame about feeling shame. And so if a person understandably in a session is going to maybe have heightened anxiety or discomfort, because that's what these medicines do, they really do kind of bring things to the surface that we've been repressing, and they're going to have a really dysregulated response to that and not be able to kind of meet themselves with love and kindness. It's not saying that it won't be helpful, but it's so much more valuable to have somebody go into those experiences with some tools for regulation. Yeah. But that's also why we're there as guides to be able to support as well.
I work with, when I do, I'm putting together more like workshop-oriented formats with clients where I like to incorporate somebody who teaches breath work and then somatic movement practices. Like, all of these pieces are important. Like, we can't just do the psychedelics. It has to be sort of like this broad spectrum of dealing with our mind, body, spirit, and dealing with the body in different ways and the mind in different ways, and then our soul sort of spiritual component in different ways. And so I try to offer a lot of resources in that regard, and a lot of and if somebody comes to me and I know they don't have the ability to do that, to hold themselves in compassion yet, or they haven't really done a lot of like work with therapists or sort of self-development work, then I will probably steer them towards microdosing while we work on building some of that stuff. Whereas if somebody comes to me who's already been doing years of this preparation work and their therapist sent them to me, or they've done work in this space before and they've been working on their own personal growth process for a while, and they're like, I don't know, I feel like I'm like, all right, let's go in deep, let's figure out what we need to find, and then we'll make sense of it. And then I also think that there is also a beautiful place for not just healing and wholeness, but like human optimization. I think once you get to the point where you become whole, and like I use psychedelics to optimize myself, to be able to show up and be the most present, most, version. I know, like, if I'm going to be creating a lot of material, or I have a big writing day, or I'm going to go speak or something, then that's like a type of microdose day, and depending on what I'm microdosing at the time, and I know how to utilize these things and work with my sort of system to kind of be the highest expression of who I am. And so we can use psychedelics for that as well, which is really cool. They're multifaceted and multifunctional.
Amazing
tools. Yeah.
Well, any final words, Joy, before we wrap? You have just been such a vessel of wisdom today. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Anything for entrepreneurs who, perhaps are looking to you for just, general life wisdom, or they're wondering perhaps maybe they're a service provider like yourself and they're wondering how to position themselves in this world. What advice do you have for them?
I do find that the thing I'm noticing the most that people are craving is community and connection, right now. And as I said earlier, like if what we do is an expression of who we are, if we are struggling in any way and how we're expressing ourselves professionally, it probably comes from a lack of self-knowledge, and that like the most effective thing you could do for your business is get to know yourself better. The most effective thing you can do I work with couples intensively, and a lot of times these are, entrepreneurs and CEOs or other professionals who are trying to run a business and have a family, and then we're working together in those spaces where it's like, oh, well, if you can't connect with your spouse on a very deep level, maybe it's because you don't actually have that level of connection with yourself, and you can only meet somebody as deeply as they've met themselves. And then the more that we do that, and the more we get to know ourselves and express who we are authentically, we actually give other people permission to do the same, and it does create a container of safety, and that also builds trust, right, with people that you're working with. And then professionally, that always translates to a more fulfilling, rewarding, and authentically successful company. And I see this all the time with clients that I've worked with, where it's like they figure out who they are and they start expressing that, and suddenly everything starts to expand professionally for them.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
This was great. It was awesome having you on. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.